Hi everyone, my name is Alyssa Price. Today I'll be going over Chapter 10, which is going to be Special Death Investigations. As reading and reviewing this chapter, I did realize that there was a lot of sections to be covered and a lot of subsections, so I tried to break it down as easy as possible and try to organize my PowerPoint to fit it appropriately. So as an introduction, although each of the following subjects being discussed all have their own unique additions, every death scene should be approached the same way, whether the decedent is an elderly individual with chronic health conditions found dead in bed or possible homicide victim who is found in the street. I found that this quote really was put in the best possible wording. That's why I quoted it. So this is going to be from page 141 if you wanted to refer back to it. The next section in this chapter is going to be child's death. And the subsection to this is going to be working with the family. The first thing that should be of concern is to find answers to relay to the family members and other victims. So obviously that's going to be the most prevalent thing that you're going to want to do, because that's what the family members and other victims are going to be expecting you to do immediately. It is very common for law enforcement to assume and treat child death as homicide. Once the scene is secured and cleared from suspicion of any foul play, families should be able to hold their child. Just make sure like the morale is there to let families come in and hold their child when it is appropriate time, because they're ultimately going to be waiting to have that moment. As medical examiners, you should never make the family feel blamed for the death, because this can compromise a relationship that you need to have with them. You need like a trusting relationship if you're going to get any answers out of them, so you really need to set up a relationship where they're not going to feel guarded and want to not tell you things. Instead, a medical examiner should greet the family and make it known that they have arrived on scene and that they will be back to talk with them in moments to come. This is the foundation that creates a less chaotic environment and creates trust between the examiner and family. Again, like I said, the trust is going to be really important in this aspect to getting answers that you need in future. The next subsection is going to be documenting the scene. There was a lot to cover in this. When documenting any scene, photos are always essential. We've talked about this in the beginning of the chapter, beginning of the book, all throughout the chapters in the book. So photos are always going to be essential, especially when documenting a child's death. Best place to start in the outside is the outside of the dwelling. If it's a homicide, then it's expected to take pictures of the house in a 360-degree fashion, like we've talked about in the past. Photographs of the areas in the house are important to recognize the cleanliness and order of the house. This would be the case anywhere, not just in one's home. So if it's in a care facility, a care center, just anywhere else, really all areas should be photographed. The examiner should be sure to secure pictures of medications, food, and beverages inside the home as well, to be sure to know what could be determined the child's death. Example, a mother could be passing medication, or others through breast milk while feeding baby. That could be done by blood drawn and easily found out. But yeah, you want to document any medication that's around the house, the labels, where they're found, where they're at, the location in the house, everything like that. Be sure to secure photos of bottles, a child's formula, and even the inside of a fridge to see the nutritional value of a child and what they're receiving. Samples of formula and actually taking the entire bottles from the home should be secured and taken to be tested. The formula should be tested to see if it's going to be the right type of formula, if anything got mixed with the formula, anything like that, anything that could be of suspicion. An investigator, by the way, this is documenting the scene continued. An investigator should document a child's sleeping arrangements to be sure it is age appropriate. By this we mean, like, is it big enough? Age appropriate as in, are they a 10-year-old? Is it an infant? Are they in a crib? Some of the specific questions that the book lined out on this page was, did the child sleep in a crib or a soft surface? So you're going to want to know, like, did they actually even have a bed? If the child did sleep in a crib, was there other items such as blankets, pillows, etc.? Was the bed padding firm or soft? You want to know, because As you read throughout the chapter, you'll realize that soft surfaces are more likely to allow children to choke or kind of like smother themselves because they're soft. If they're nice and firm, they're not able to kind of like engulf themselves into the blankets or the mattress or the padding, things like that. What was the temperature in the room? So you're going to want to know, is it like way too cold, way too hot? Is it comfortable living arrangements for a child? Often smaller children, if it's super cold in the room, they can get even colder than we would because they can't regulate their temperature in their body. Same if it's way too hot, they can't regulate their temperatures in their body as well as we can as adults. Investigators should always analyze the house for the parents' proper preparation when taking care of their child. Diapers, wipes, soiled diapers. So when you're going throughout the house, you should be taking pictures if there's diapers with fecal matter, or if there's wet diapers, if there's even a supply of diapers and wipes, if there's a supply of the essentials that a child needs, are they stocked up and prepared to take care of a child, things like that. Any soiled diapers should be documented and collected for further testing. The location should be photographed, and you should analyze and recognize if it's wet, dry, if there's fecal matter, or if there's any indication that there was any trauma, like blood in the diaper, things like that. Now going on to documenting the scene and photographing a child directly. Basic photographs of the child in the position they were found should be taken. So obviously, usually when a child is found, the parent automatically goes to grab them to see what's wrong. But after that, really the body shouldn't be moved and the body should be taking pictures of how the investigator found them. Any items surrounding or touching the child, so any like blankets, any stuffed animals, any bottles, really anything that's surrounding the child that could have been involved with this should be taken pictures of. And identifying photographs of the child's face. So you want to get up close pictures of that child's face. If there's any bruising, any identifying features of the child, just anything about the child's face so you can have everything documented around that aspect. Close-up photos that should be considered are things like their genitalia, anus, hands, and a side profile picture of the child's head to see if there's any trauma, any lumps, bumps, anything like that, to see if child was sexually assaulted. Anything like that should be documented in picture form, because like we said, pictures are just like the main source of evidence in these cases. And overall, being able to prove there was no foul play involved should be an important aspect in the documenting the scene, because it is common for there to be rumors revolved around this. So oftentimes when a child dies, there's always going to be rumors of how'd they die, did the parents do something, did something happen. Usually children are healthy beings, so they're not going to just pass away unexpectedly unless there was a medical condition or something underlying that would have caused it. So you're always going to want to first rule out foul play indefinitely and take all the measures and not skip a beat in this section, because many people will go straight to believing that it will be foul play because it is a child. For our next slide, this is going to be our next subsection in children's death, which will be post-mortem changes of children. The changes within children process at a different rate compared to adults. So of course we have a larger body, we have larger mass, we have more weight on us. All these components go into the like decomposition of how we process after dying. The accuracy of being able to tell the time of death is based on postmortem intervals. A few hours compared to a severely decomposed body is going to be like the real difference. It's going to be harder to track the postmortem intervals and know the time of death. The 3 postmortem changes an investigator will be looking for are liver, algor, and rigor mortis. And remembering that we did read in the beginning of the book that liver is going to be the pooling of blood in the body, just the puddling up of blood. Algor is going to be the body temperature, whether it's cold, hot, temperature of it really can determine a lot of things. And then rigor is going to be the stiffening of joints, bones, just really the overall stiffening of the body and where it's stiffening at, such as location and things like that. Children tend to cool rapidly compared to adults. This is going to be because, like I said in the beginning, their bone mass and just the size of them is going to be a lot smaller, so they're not going to hold on to body heat for long at all after they're deceased. They're really going to like escape all the heat in their body and cool down a lot quicker than adults. We tend to have more body weight on us, and therefore it can conduct the heat a lot longer than children can. So this makes it a little bit more difficult for investigators to tell based on body temperature. They have to remember to take that in account. Due to the rapid changes within children, this makes it more difficult to determine an accurate postmortem interval range. Yeah, due to everything that I just listed above, it's going to really be a lot more difficult to determine when a child has passed away and all of their postmortem changes. So when an investigator is looking at a child, they just really have to take into account all of these changes, all of these rapid body movements, changes, anything that's going to really go into what's going to determine the time of death and such like that. Moving on to our next subsection in a child's death is going to be the CDC form and doll reenactments. So in the summer of 1996, there was the first sudden unexplained infant death investigation reporting form. This is also used to evaluate the trends that represent and present in the data reported. So there's a list in your book. I tried not to really copy it word for word or anything, but it's a lot more detailed in the book. Here are just kind of some points that I'll go into, but this is really all the information that's going to be in the report and consist of the report. So the first thing is going to be the decedent's information as well as the witness's information. That's going to be general stuff like name, phone number, address, maybe ethnicity, things like that, just like simple background information on the witness and decedent. There is also going to be a witness interview that consists of 34 different questions. It's pretty extensive. The next thing will be infant's medical history from birth to recent signs of symptoms and illness. So it's really just going to go through anything that's happened with a child from the time that they were born, anytime they had the flu, anytime they broke a bone, anytime really anything happened to them that was either major or minor in their life medically. The next one is going to be infant's dietary history. So again, it's going to be from birth to recent. So any fluctuations in weight, any fluctuations in like their appetite, the way they eat. Again, this is going to be related kind of to how many times they've been sick and things like that, just like how many times their nutritional levels have fluctuated and any time it's been documented. So pregnancy history that asks questions about prenatal care and medications that were used. Again, when you're breastfeeding, you can get medication that comes through the breast milk, things like that. So they're going to want that to be documented if you're on any medications. And again, if you're getting any prenatal care or if you're taking care of yourself while being pregnant, this is all going to be very important in determining if there was any underlying causes or anything that could have led to a child's death that was outside of foul play, that could have been like medications again, or anything that you did while you were pregnant that could have been an underlying cause. Incident scene investigation. This is going to focus on the conditions of the household. So again, like I talked about in the past, how the household was kept up. Is it clean? Is it dirty? Is there adequate amount of food in the household? Is there supplies for a child in the household? Does it look like there's even a room for the child or an area for the child to sleep that is appropriate? Things like that is going to be investigated. Is there like baby gates, even small things that are like, is it child proof? Is there a lot of things that the child can get into? It's just going to get into the specifics of that. Investigation summary. So this is going to be a recorded investigation like an allotted time for recorded investigations. This is the time to find out inconsistencies in people's stories. Talk to this family member, talk to another family member, talk to the household members, brothers, sisters, anyone that's involved or around the child that had passed away. This is the time to be able to interview them and investigate the situation while being recorded. Investigation diagrams. This is just going to be sketches of the area. Someone comes in, takes sketches of like suspicious areas in the house or where the child passed away at, things like that. It's just going to be simple sketches that can be recorded for the investigation. And then lastly, it's going to be just an overall summary for the pathologist to go through. So it's just going to be a simple overview of each of these things that were already reported, so the pathologist can quickly go over, analyze, and have just a quick summary to overview. Alrighty, and to continue the CDC form and doll reenactment, to touch on the doll reenactments, this is essentially just, as it sounds, a reenactment that you use with a doll. This is important in reenacting the scene because obviously the investigators and anyone revolved around the investigation wasn't there at the time of death or leading up to the death. So this just paints a picture to really go into like the depths of the investigation and give more of a clear picture. So the most important aspect of the doll reenactment is having a doll with an appropriate size compared to the child that has died and being investigated. So it's just really important to make sure that the weight, height, things like that, the doll actually looks like the size of the child to really paint a picture. You don't want a 30-pound child that passed away getting reenacted as a 70-pound doll, because obviously it's going to look older. The way that the body moves is going to be different, how much space it takes up, where it passed away, where you're going to react. All of this is going to take effect, and it's not going to paint a necessarily clear picture. The doll should be in gender identifiable clothes. In the book, it described that some agencies, to make this possible and to make it easier to identify the gender, on the shirts of the dolls, they'll put like an F or an M or an F or a B for like female, boy, female, male, things like that, just so like they for sure can tell if it's a boy or a girl while investigating and reenacting this. The doll must have a neck that can be adjusted to the appropriate position the child was originally found in. It's very important to see where the neck was, to see if it like suffocated, to see if it rolled over, to see if they broke its neck, really anything. It's just really important to see where the neck was positioned so you can take pictures or analyze it some more. So you just need a doll that's going to be able to get that head mobility that you need. Taking photographs of the scene is important to be seen by law enforcement attorneys or jury members. So again, this is why the doll reenactment is so important for these individuals to be able to really paint a picture and see what went on so they can give a fair judgment. Look at this in 3 segments. This is going to be the easiest way to break it down, is how the child was placed, how the child was found, and what resuscitative efforts were performed and how they were performed. So first, how the child was placed. It is very important to reenact the last position a child was in to see if there was any outside influences like stuffed animals, blankets, etc. You should always ask the family how they set their child down and in what exact position, just so you can really gauge the dynamic of how they were last placed. To continue doll reenactment, the next stage is going to be how the child was found. Examine the sleeping environment. The examination and examiner should paint a picture of the differences in how the child was last placed and how the child was found. So you should really have a correlation of, okay, the mom set them on their back and now they're found on their face. That should be a correlation of seeing like, okay, obviously something happened in between these 2 things. Or if the mom set them on the back and the baby's still on their back, then what really happened in between those time periods that the child was alive and then not alive. And then the resuscitative efforts, it is very important to have the parent reenact how they perform CPR and any other efforts. An examiner can note any trauma caused during the attempt, and broken ribs should be noted as suspicion because baby's ribs, they're still composed of mainly cartilage, so there should really be no reason why a baby's ribs are going to be broken. They're really just like going to be more bendy than breakable. It is always important to know the milestones of a child to be able to determine the plausibility of one's story or actions. So going back to if a mom set the child on their back and then they're on their face, you should know that if they're like 1 month old, that's really impossible that like a child rolled themselves over. So how did they get in that position? So that's why milestones are going to be important here. These are just some example pictures. So the first picture here to the top left is going to be a picture that shows a demonstration of a mother laying down with her child before falling asleep. This is going to be the doll reenactment that we talked about earlier. And another doll reenactment is going to be the bottom right picture. And this is going to be a demonstration of how CPR was performed on a child. Alrighty, and then also to continue CDC form and doll reenactment, a child that is intentionally killed within a time frame of 24-hour period is considered a neonaticide. Sorry, I really can't say that word. I've been practicing it and I still just can't get that word down for some reason. If a child is killed after 24 hours of being born and is also under the age of 1, this is considered an infanticide. So it is always essential to fully investigate the death of a child, whether there be foul play or not. Many factors can take part in the death of a child. Moving on to our next main section, it's going to be water deaths. So I found a good quote that really just summed it up pretty well, a good statistic that goes with it, and it's going to be on page 153 in the book. A water-related death occurs at a rate of 10 deaths per day in the United States, reported by the CDC in 2016. This statistic does not include boating fatalities. So this just really goes to show that water-related deaths are pretty prevalent, considering that boating fatalities are not going to be incorporated. When looking to see if someone died from drowning, investigators and examiners look at the sinuses, trachea, and bronchus airways to see if the significant amount of fluid was found. So these are going to be the 3 main areas that they check if there's a significant amount of water found. It is important to note that although this is found, there could still be other contributing factors. Example, someone going into cardiac arrest in a swimming pool. Obviously, there could have been a possibility that someone survived a cardiac arrest had they not been in the water. So that's going to be a contributing factor. It is very possible for someone to drown in low levels of water if they become unresponsive, abuse drugs, or any other medication. So even if the water is barely above their head while laying down, it just has to really cover the nose or mouth to be able enough to drown somebody, and it's going to be possible because while someone's abusing drugs, they can be inebriated enough to not be able to lift up their head or have the strength to really function their body. Same with if they become unresponsive and if they're on any other medication. To continue water deaths, if someone drowns in a large body of water, typically the body will sink and stays in their original area. They'll usually get trapped on some branches, anything, get stuck under the water, but typically the body doesn't float. The decomposition of the body depends on whether the body resurfaces or stays under the water or not. Depends on the process taking place. Things investigators look for in scene findings are washerwoman hands, which is going to be basically when you've been in a bath for a very long time and your hands get wrinkly. That's what they're going to look at, is the intensity of your hands and the wrinkliness of it. Also, a cone of foam coming from the mouth. This comes from water being in your lungs and creating a foam barrier outside of your mouth. Also, body markings from branches or other animals eating at you underwater can be another marking. Natural disasters account for a large amount of drownings within the year, so that's going to be your tsunamis, flash floods, even tornadoes, things like that can also create a large number of the drownings that happen. Due to there being little information about the circumstances leading up to water death, preservation of evidence is key. access to the body is usually difficult if a body is found in a large body of water. Dive teams usually collect the body in mesh body bags and quickly, securely return the body to be examined. So the mesh bags are just going to make it easier to collect the bodies. Like always, photographing the scene is very important in any death investigation. So you're going to want to take pictures of point of entry into the water, and also a statement from the dive team should be taken, because they're really the ones going under the water, seeing what could have been under the water, what could have caused them to drown, if the body was trapped on anything, or if the body was getting weighed down by anything. That's why the dive team's statement is very important. Other elements that should be collected are air temperatures, and water levels. Our next section in this chapter is going to be electrocution. These deaths can range from instances of someone quite literally being electrocuted. So a lot of people just think of like electrocution in chairs, things like that, or electrocution by like lightning strikes or like something very intense. But it can also just be something as simple as an outlet, or you trying to do handyman work around your house and not having the proper experience of knowing how to work with electrical outlets and such. Examples of electrocution is going to be lightning strikes, live power lines, and faulty electrical appliances. When investigating deaths like this, you should always be aware of anything that can still have an electrical charge. If this took place in water or during a storm, you should always wait for the storm to pass, or you should always make sure that the water is not electrically charged. If it does happen in a house, you should ensure that the house's electrical unit is turned off in the entire household. And the electrical company may need to be called out to ensure the safety of the investigators and to make sure nothing else is electrically charged. The investigator should always document the presence of any injuries. Low voltage injuries may, or low voltage injuries should be or can look like small burns, and high voltage injuries may look like large burns distributed throughout the entire body. The next section is going to be environmental deaths. 2 environmental deaths covered in this chapter, although there's going to be many others that can be covered. This section really just focuses on hyper and hypothermia. Hyperthermia, there was a great quote on page 157 if you'd like to refer back to that. It says, "The environment is too hot for an individual's body to process through normal means such as sweating." An example, someone traveling on foot across the border of the United States and Mexico, a lot of times that takes several days, and our bodies oftentimes will succumb to the heat. Investigators should know if someone has an AC or fan, drugs or medication use, the zip code of any areas so the weather can be documented. Any of these things should be noted. A common death is going to be children being left in a hot car. That's going to be the most common, like heat stroke death or death of a body overheating. Hypothermia, a quote was found on page 157 of our book. It's going to be, "The environment is too cold and an individual's body is losing heat quicker than it can generate heat. Any conditions where individuals have trouble regulating their temperature puts those at higher risk of hypothermia." The investigators should note lack of appropriate shelter and clothing, if there is any heating appliances, and documentation of weather temperature. So yeah, you should just take, do they have a heater? Is it super cold? Do they even live on the top of a building? It could be different temperatures up there. Whether it is hyperthermia or hypothermia, location is the most important aspect to be documented in this section. Our next section of this chapter is going to be mass fatalities. Again, a definition can be found on page 159. I include the definitions from the book just because it's a clear definition. There can't be any confusion or anything. The wording is just super good on them, so that's why I can include the actual definitions from the book instead of creating my own. And the definition here is going to be an event which is too large for a jurisdiction to handle with its normal staffing and capabilities. An example of a mass fatality is going to be the Aurora theater shooting in Colorado. I believe that happened in 2012. Preparation and pre-planning for situations like such is very essential. So that's going to be your most important thing to look at here. Internal plans, policies on how to respond, and working with other agencies is going to be how you're going to prepare and pre-plan. Local law enforcement is usually the first one to the scene. Their job is to secure the scene and make sure the scene is safe as possible for any other agencies that are coming in and for any other victims. The fire department or EMS are going to be the next to arrive, and they will obviously be concerned with treating the individuals who are injured. Oftentimes, if it's a large scene that they need to cover, they'll make areas for triage tents. The crime lab and medical legal office and dispatches are also get dispatched as soon as possible, and they decide how to proceed with the investigation when they get to the event. The medical legal offices is responsible for the bodies, and the criminalists are responsible for the general crime scene. Oftentimes this blends into one. Like it says here, it is not common for the evidence to overlap in situations of mass fatalities. Offices simply work together to determine who has the better skill sets for a specific situation. The best way to approach large-scale events like such is to break the scene into several smaller scenes. This helps focus on the details and limits mistakes. As stated before, being prepared and pre-planning is essential. You need to know what resources are needed, and then also if DMORT needs to be called. So DMORT is going to be the Disaster Mortuary Operational Response Team, and that's going to be determined while they're on the scene if they need to be called out to the scene. Our next section in the chapter is going to be anthropology. If a death involves skeletal remains, an anthropologist will be called to the scene. If a bone is found, it is important for the person who found it to put it back where it is found so an investigation can begin. The location in a lot of these death scene investigations is the most important part. When a bone is found on the scene should first be secured for processing. Like all scenes, they should always be secured first. The scene should be larger because of the possibilities of animals spreading bones and tissues like that. A lot of times animals will feed on a body and disperse the remainings of the body elsewhere. So it's always better to make a bigger diameter and then range it in as you investigate. Be sure to document how the scene appears to look. That means landmarks, mark any remains found with a flag, look at items of clothing, personal items, how the clothing looks, if it's kind of like messed up or if there's a bullet wound in one, things like that. Just really look at how things appear to be. National Missing and Unidentified Persons is going to be a system that shows personal items of identified remains. This is going to be a system where families can go look at unidentified items and identify them to be related with one of their loved ones, so we can get those unidentified persons identified. Other ways to identify would be through dental work, chronic deformities, or healed fractures or unusual structural anomalies. But this is going to be assumed that the anthropologists and people investigating the body and bones are going to have access to things like x-rays and such. So sometimes those aren't as reliable to go off of. I believe this is going to be our last section, and it's going to be in custody. So by in custody, this just simply means an individual that dies while in the custody of law enforcement. This has really been prevalent in the past couple months and for the past couple years in the media and just in our day-to-day life. You've been seeing it a lot on the news and such. It is important that these deaths are fully investigated to determine any foul play, things like that. Oftentimes these are ruled as a homicide, but it doesn't always mean that it's going to be illegal due to the fact that police do have the right to use deadly force if it's justified. And that's going to be my presentation. I hope that everything was kind of laid out in an organized fashion that made sense. Again, I don't have a citation made for the book, but a lot of my quotes and everything are going to have the page numbers if you need to refer back to them. And thank you for listening to my presentation. Have a good day.